In a quiet suburban neighborhood where the streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns and colorful flower beds, life moved at a predictable pace. The houses stood close together, their windows reflecting the golden glow of the setting sun each evening. It was the kind of place where people waved to one another from across the street, where children played on sidewalks until dusk, and where peace reigned supreme, or so it seemed. Among the residents was Mr. Harold Jenkins, an older white man in his late 60s. Harold had lived in this neighborhood for over 30 years, and he prided himself on being its unofficial watchdog. He believed that keeping things orderly, whether it was ensuring no one parked their cars too close to driveways or making sure everyone followed the rules about lawn maintenance, was key to maintaining harmony. To Harold, this little corner of the world was perfect just as it was, untouched by change and unfamiliar faces. But lately Harold had grown uneasy. New families were moving into the area, bringing with them different customs, styles, and ways of living. While some neighbors welcomed these changes, Harold saw them as threats to the tranquility he cherished. His complaints grew louder and more frequent. He grumbled about loud music coming from down the block even though it was barely audible. He criticized how certain households left their garbage cans out for an extra day after collection, despite knowing full well that sometimes schedules got mixed up. And then there was the newest addition to the neighborhood, a young black couple named Marcus and Angela Johnson. Marcus and Angela had recently purchased the house next door to Harold's. For years they had saved diligently, working tirelessly, toward the dream of owning a home in a peaceful suburb like this one. Marcus worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown, while Angela ran her own successful business designing custom jewelry. They were hardworking, ambitious, and eager to start this new chapter of their lives. But what they didn't anticipate was the cold reception they would receive from their neighbor. From the moment they moved in, Harold made his disapproval clear. On the first day, as movers unloaded boxes from the truck, Harold appeared on his porch, arms crossed, watching every move with a scowl etched onto his face. When Marcus waved politely and introduced himself, Harold gave only a curt nod before retreating back inside without saying a word. Over the next few days, Harold continued to observe the Johnsons closely, scrutinizing everything they did. Did they park their car slightly crooked? Harold noticed. Was there a box left on the porch overnight? Harold took note. Every minor detail became fuel for his growing resentment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus and Angela decided to unwind by sitting on their front porch. They brought out a small table, set it with plates of food, and enjoyed a quiet dinner under the stars. It was something they loved doing. It reminded them of simpler times, when life wasn't dictated by work deadlines or endless responsibilities. As they laughed and talked softly, Harold peeked over from his yard. At first he lingered near his window, pretending to water plants that didn't need watering. Then, unable to contain himself, he stepped outside and muttered something under his breath about people these days. Angela heard him but chose not to react. Instead, she smiled warmly at Harold and said, "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" Harold froze for a moment, caught off guard by her friendliness. He mumbled something unintelligible and quickly retreated, back into his house, leaving the Johnsons alone once again. Despite Harold's obvious disdain, Marcus and Angela refused to let it bother them. They knew that starting fresh in a new neighborhood came with challenges, especially for a black couple in a predominantly white community. They were determined to prove that they belonged here, that they could contribute positively to the neighborhood just like anyone else. So they went about their days with grace and patience, hoping that time would soften Harold's rigid views. Little did they know, however, that Harold's prejudice ran deeper than mere annoyance. What started as harmless observations soon escalated into outright hostility. One afternoon, as Angela tended to her garden, planting vibrant flowers along the edge of her driveway, Harold marched over, his face flushed with anger. "What are you doing?" he demanded, pointing at the freshly dug soil. "I'm planting flowers," Angela replied calmly, holding up a trowel. "I thought it would brighten up the place." "This isn't your kind of neighborhood," Harold shot back, his tone sharp. "You should stick to Whatever it is you're used to. Angela stared at him, stunned by his audacity. She wanted to argue, to tell him exactly what she thought of his narrow-mindedness, but instead she took a deep breath and simply said, "We're your neighbors now, Mr. Jenkins. Maybe we can find a way to coexist peacefully." Harold huffed and walked away, muttering under his breath. But his words lingered in Angela's mind long after he was gone. She realized then that winning him over wouldn't be easy. Still, she held on to hope that kindness and perseverance might eventually break through his walls of bias. As weeks passed, tensions between Harold and the Johnsons simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right spark to ignite. Neither side anticipated how far things would escalate, or how drastically their lives would change because of it. For now, though, the neighborhood remained outwardly calm, its secrets hidden behind closed doors and carefully maintained facades. Yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, a storm was brewing, one that would challenge everyone involved and force them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. As the days turned into weeks, the tension between Harold Jenkins and the Johnsons continued to simmer. What had started as subtle disapproval on Harold's part grew into something more overt and confrontational. To Harold, the presence of Marcus and Angela in the neighborhood felt like an intrusion, a disruption to the way things were supposed to be. His complaints became louder, his glares sharper, and his comments more pointed. Marcus and Angela, on the other hand, tried their best to ignore Harold's behavior. They understood that moving into a new community often came with challenges, especially when people weren't used to diversity. But they also believed that kindness could bridge any gap, no matter how wide. So they greeted Harold warmly whenever they saw him, offered polite smiles, and went about their lives without letting his negativity affect them. Still, it was hard not to notice the growing hostility emanating from their neighbor. One sunny Saturday morning, Angela decided to host a small barbecue for friends and family. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a casual gathering to celebrate their first month in the house and to introduce themselves to some of the neighbors. She invited a few close colleagues, her sister who lived nearby, and even extended an invitation to Harold, though he declined with a curt shake of his head. The backyard buzzed with energy as guests arrived. Someone brought a portable speaker, and soft music played in the background. Plates of food were laid out on a long table covered with a checkered cloth. Laughter filled the air as children ran around chasing each other, while adults chatted about work, hobbies, and life in general. For Marcus and Angela, it was the perfect way to unwind after a busy week. Everything seemed peaceful, until Harold appeared at the edge of their driveway, arms crossed and face red with anger. "You're disturbing the peace," Harold shouted, pointing accusingly at Angela. "This is a quiet neighborhood, not some party zone." Angela paused mid-conversation and turned to look at him. Her initial surprise quickly gave way to calm determination. She walked over to where Harold stood, leaving a few curious glances behind her. "Good afternoon, Mr. Jenkins," she said, politely, her voice steady. "We're just having a small get-together with friends and family. I promise we'll keep the noise down." Harold scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Small? There are cars parked all over the street, and that music, you call that keeping the noise down?" Angela glanced toward the source of the music. The volume was barely above a whisper, certainly not loud enough to disturb anyone. Still, she nodded understandingly. "I'll turn it down if it bothers you," she offered, trying to diffuse the situation. "But I assure you, we're being considerate of our neighbors." Harold didn't respond. Instead, he stared at her for a moment longer before spinning around and storming back to his house. The screen door slammed shut behind him, echoing through the otherwise cheerful atmosphere. Guests exchanged awkward looks, unsure of what had just happened. Marcus joined Angela outside, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't let him ruin your day," Marcus said softly. "He's just upset because he doesn't know us yet." Angela sighed, forcing a smile. "You're right. Let's enjoy ourselves." And so, they did. The barbecue continued as planned, with everyone making an effort to focus on the positive vibes rather than Harold's outburst. By the end of the afternoon, the guests left happy and full, thanking Angela and Marcus for hosting such a lovely event. As the couple cleaned up the backyard, they couldn't help but feel proud of how smoothly everything had gone, despite Harold's attempt to derail it. But little did they know, Harold wasn't done. Back inside his house, he paced furiously, muttering under his breath about people like them ruining the neighborhood. He replayed the scene in his mind, the laughter, the music, the cars lining the street, and convinced himself that action needed to be taken. In his twisted logic, the Johnsons were troublemakers who didn't belong here, and it was up to him to set things straight. That evening, as darkness fell and the neighborhood grew quiet, Harold sat alone in his dimly lit living room. His wife, Evelyn, glanced up from her book, sensing the storm brewing within him. "What's wrong now?" she asked, her tone laced with exasperation. "That family next door, they're causing problems," Harold snapped, pacing back and forth. "They think they can do whatever they want, make all the noise they want, bring whoever they want into this neighborhood. It's unacceptable." Evelyn sighed, closing her book. "Harold, maybe you're blowing this out of proportion. Did you ever stop to think that they're just trying to fit in?" "They don't fit in," Harold retorted, his voice rising. "People like them don't understand how things work around here. They need to learn their place." Evelyn shook her head, knowing there was no reasoning with him when he got like this. She retreated upstairs, leaving Harold alone with his thoughts. For hours he stewed in his anger, replaying every interaction he'd had with the Johnsons since they moved in. Each memory fueled his resentment further, until finally, he reached a decision. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Harold picked up his phone and dialed 911. His hands trembled slightly as he pressed the numbers, but his resolve was firm. When the dispatcher answered, Harold launched into his complaint. "I need to report suspicious activity," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "There's a group of people causing trouble at the house next door. Loud music, lots of cars. It's just not normal. Something isn't right." The dispatcher assured him that officers would be sent to investigate. Satisfied, Harold hung up and leaned back in his chair, a smug smile spreading across his face. Finally, he thought, someone would put those troublemakers in their place. Meanwhile, Marcus and Angela woke up to the sound of sirens blaring outside their window. Confused, they rushed to the front door to see 2 police cars parked in their driveway. Officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they approached the house. Marcus immediately stepped forward to address them, explaining that they hadn't done anything wrong and that the previous day's gathering had been completely harmless. Before the officers could respond, Angela emerged from the doorway, her calm demeanor masking the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. She introduced herself and reiterated what Marcus had said, emphasizing that they were law-abiding citizens who valued peace and respect in their community. What none of them realized, not even Harold, was that Angela was far more than just a homeowner. Her identity was about to turn this seemingly mundane incident into something extraordinary. By the time the officers left, apologizing profusely for the disturbance, Angela knew that this wouldn't be the end of it. Harold's actions had crossed a line, and she was determined to ensure that justice prevailed, not just for herself and Marcus, but for everyone who faced prejudice because of ignorance. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change not only their lives but the entire neighborhood forever. For now, though, the tension lingered, hanging heavy in the air like storm clouds waiting to burst. Neither side knew exactly what the future held, but one thing was certain. The quiet suburban life they had once known was about to be disrupted in ways no one could have anticipated. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood as 2 police cars pulled up in front of the Johnsons' house. Their flashing blue and red lights reflected off the windows of nearby homes, drawing curious glances from neighbors, peeking through their curtains. Some were alarmed by the commotion, others simply wanted to know what was happening next door. For Marcus and Angela, however, the sight of law enforcement at their doorstep came as a shock. Marcus stepped outside first, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of calmness. He greeted the officers with a polite smile, trying to appear composed, despite the knot forming in his stomach. "Good morning, officers," he began. "Is there something we can help you with?" One of the officers, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, nodded curtly. "We received a call about suspicious activity at this address," he explained. "Can you tell us what's going on here?" Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Angela, who had joined him by then. Together they explained that they had hosted a small barbecue for friends and family the previous afternoon. They assured the officers that the gathering had been peaceful, with no loud music or disruptive behavior. In fact, Angela added, she had even turned down the volume of the music after receiving a complaint from their neighbor, though she didn't mention Harold's name. As the conversation unfolded, Angela noticed one of the officers studying her closely. His expression softened slightly and he seemed to relax. Finally, he spoke up. "Ma'am, are you Judge Angela Johnson?" he asked, his tone respectful but tinged with surprise. Angela nodded, taken aback by the question. "Yes, I am," she replied, unsure why her identity mattered in this situation. "I preside over cases at the local courthouse." The officer exchanged a meaningful look with his partner before turning back to Angela. "We apologize for disturbing you, Your Honor," he said sincerely. "We'll look into the matter further to determine whether this report holds any merit." Angela felt a mix of emotions, relief that the officers appeared understanding, but also frustration at the absurdity of the situation. She thanked them for coming and watched as they returned to their vehicles, leaving the driveway empty once again. As soon as they were gone, Marcus let out a deep breath. "Well, that was unexpected," he muttered, shaking his head. "I can't believe someone actually called the cops on us." Angela crossed her arms, her mind racing. She already had a pretty good idea of who might have made the call. "It's Harold," she said firmly. "Who else would do something like this? He's been complaining about everything we've done since we moved in." Marcus frowned, anger flickering in his eyes. "What gives him the right? We haven't done anything wrong. This isn't fair." Angela placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You're right. It's not fair. But we can't let this slide. If people like Harold think they can get away with targeting us because of our race, they'll keep doing it to others too. We need to take a stand." Later that day, Angela decided to dig deeper into the incident. She contacted the police department to request details about the caller who had reported them. To her dismay, she learned that the caller refused to provide their name during the initial call, citing anonymity. However, based on the timing and location of the report, it didn't take much detective work to connect the dots. It was clear that Harold Jenkins was behind the false accusation. Determined to hold him accountable, Angela met with Marcus to discuss their options. After careful consideration, they agreed to file a formal complaint against Harold for making a false police report. While taking legal action wasn't something they relished, they believed it was necessary, not just for themselves, but to send a message to anyone else who might consider using racism as a weapon. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors who had attended the barbecue rallied around the Johnsons, offering words of support and solidarity. One woman, Mrs. Thompson, approached Angela later that evening while she was watering her plants. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," Mrs. Thompson said earnestly. "Harold has always been difficult, but this is beyond ridiculous." Angela appreciated the sentiment but remained focused on the bigger picture. "Thank you for standing with us," she replied. "But this isn't just about me and Marcus. It's about setting an example. No one should have to deal with this kind of prejudice." Meanwhile, Harold sat in his living room, oblivious to the backlash brewing around him. He patted himself on the back for what he saw as a job well done. In his mind, calling the police had been a bold move, a way to assert dominance and remind the Johnsons that they weren't welcome in his neighborhood. He imagined them packing up and moving out within days, leaving him victorious. But reality soon came crashing down on him. A few days later, Harold received a letter summoning him to court. At first, he dismissed it as junk mail, tossing it aside without a second thought. When another envelope arrived bearing the same message, curiosity got the better of him. Opening it reluctantly, he scanned the contents and felt his blood run cold. "You've got to be kidding me," Harold exclaimed aloud, crumpling the paper in his fist. His wife, Evelyn, looked up from her knitting, startled by his outburst. "What is it now?" she asked wearily. "They're suing me." Harold spat, pacing back and forth. "That couple next door, they're pressing charges for harassment or something. Can you believe this?" Evelyn sighed deeply, setting her knitting needles aside. "Harold, maybe this is your wake-up call. You've been acting like a bully ever since they moved in. Did you really expect them to sit back and do nothing?" Harold bristled at her words. "I'm not the bad guy here. They're the ones causing trouble, not me." Evelyn shook her head, exasperated. "Whether you like it or not, they're part of this community now. And if you keep treating them this way, you'll only end up looking like the fool." Despite Evelyn's attempts to reason with him, Harold remained convinced that he was in the right. He vowed to fight the charges, certain that his arguments would prevail in court. What he failed to realize, however, was that the Johnsons weren't ordinary plaintiffs. With Angela's position as a judge lending weight to their case, the odds were stacked heavily against him. As the trial date approached, tensions in the neighborhood reached an all-time high. Conversations buzzed about the upcoming hearing, with opinions divided among residents. Some sided with Harold, believing he was merely protecting the integrity of the community. Others supported the Johnsons, appalled by the blatant display of racism. Amidst the chaos, Angela and Marcus remained steadfast, determined to see justice served. For Harold, the realization of what he had unleashed began to sink in. Late one night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, doubt crept into his thoughts. Was he truly justified in his actions? Or had his prejudice blinded him to the harm he was causing? These questions gnawed at him, though pride prevented him from admitting fault, at least for now. Little did Harold know, the courtroom would become the stage where his biases were laid bare for everyone to see. The consequences of his choices would ripple far beyond his own life, forcing him and the entire neighborhood to confront uncomfortable truths about race, privilege, and accountability. Whether he liked it or not, change was coming, and there was no turning back. For Angela and Marcus, the fight was about more than just vindication. It was about proving that kindness, resilience, and courage could triumph over ignorance and hate. And as the pieces fell into place, one thing became abundantly clear. The quiet suburban neighborhood they had chosen as their home would never be the same again. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the quiet suburban neighborhood everyone was used to. Its walls were painted a dull gray, and the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and old paper. Rows of benches lined either side of the room, filled with curious neighbors who had come to witness the trial. Reporters sat in the back, scribbling notes on notepads, while cameras flashed quietly outside the building. For a community that prided itself on peace and order, this sudden drama felt like an unwelcome intrusion. Harold Jenkins sat stiffly in his seat, clutching the armrests as if bracing himself for impact. His wife, Evelyn, sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Harold glanced around nervously, taking in the sea of faces staring back at him. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental, but most were simply curious about how this bizarre situation would unfold. He couldn't help but feel like he was being put on display, a spectacle for the entire town to dissect. On the other side of the aisle, Marcus and Angela Johnson sat calmly, their posture relaxed but resolute. Angela wore a navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, her presence commanding respect without saying a word. She had chosen her outfit carefully, knowing that appearances mattered in situations like this. Beside her, Marcus held her hand under the table, offering silent support. They weren't here for revenge. They were here to make a statement, to show that prejudice, no matter how small or seemingly harmless, had consequences. As the judge entered the room, everyone stood. The gavel struck once, signaling the start of the proceedings. The presiding judge, a middle-aged woman named Judge Patricia Reynolds, took her seat and peered down at the parties involved through thin-rimmed glasses. Her voice was firm yet measured as she began addressing the court. "This case concerns allegations of harassment and filing a false police report," Judge Reynolds announced. "Let us proceed." The prosecution's lawyer, a young man with Sharp features and an even sharper mind, rose to speak first. He outlined the events leading up to the trial, presenting evidence gathered from the police department and eyewitness accounts from the barbecue. Photos of the gathering showed smiling guests enjoying themselves, while audio recordings captured the soft hum of music playing in the background. It was clear that nothing about the event warranted such extreme measures. When it came time for Angela to testify, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her as she walked confidently to the stand, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth before settling into the chair. The prosecutor approached her, his tone respectful. "Mrs. Johnson, can you describe your relationship with Mr. Harold Jenkins?" he asked. Angela nodded, maintaining eye contact with the jury. "Mr. Jenkins has been openly hostile toward my husband and me since we moved into the neighborhood," she explained. "He's complained about trivial things, how we park our car, how long our garbage cans stay out, but those complaints escalated when he called the police on us after a small family gathering." "And what was the nature of this gathering?" the prosecutor continued. "It was a simple barbecue, a chance for us to connect with friends and introduce ourselves to our neighbors," Angela replied. "We made sure to keep the noise level low and clean up afterward." Despite Mr. Jenkins' claims, there was nothing disruptive about it. Her words resonated throughout the courtroom, painting a vivid picture of two very different perspectives. One rooted in fear and prejudice, the other in goodwill and inclusivity. Next, it was Harold's turn to take the stand. Nervously adjusting his tie, he shuffled forward, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone. His lawyer attempted to frame his actions as concern for the neighborhood's safety, but cracks quickly began to show in his defense. Under cross-examination, Harold struggled to explain why he hadn't introduced himself properly to the Johnsons or tried to resolve his grievances peacefully. Instead, he admitted to making assumptions based solely on their race. "So you admit that your decision to call the police was influenced by stereotypes rather than actual behavior?" the prosecutor pressed. Harold hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. I didn't mean any harm," he stammered. "I just thought—" "You just thought what, Mr. Jenkins?" the prosecutor interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "That because they're black they must be troublemakers? That they don't belong in your kind of neighborhood?" The courtroom erupted into murmurs and Judge Reynolds banged her gavel to restore order. Harold sank lower in his seat, visibly shaken. For the first time, he realized the weight of his words and the damage they had caused. The final piece of evidence came as a surprise to everyone except Angela and Marcus. During closing arguments, the prosecution revealed a video clip taken by a neighbor during the barbecue. In it, Harold could be seen glaring at the Johnsons from his porch, muttering angrily under his breath. The footage captured his disdain perfectly, leaving little room for doubt about his motivations. By the end of the day, the verdict was clear. Judge Reynolds ruled in favor of the Johnsons, stating that Harold's actions constituted harassment and discrimination. She ordered him to pay a substantial fine and attend mandatory sensitivity training sessions. Additionally, she encouraged the local authorities to investigate further instances of racial profiling within the community. As the gavel struck again, signaling the conclusion of the trial, Harold slumped in his chair, defeated. The crowd dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves about what they had witnessed. Some shook their heads in disappointment, while others nodded approvingly, glad to see justice served. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Angela and Marcus, eager for a comment. Angela stepped forward, her demeanor calm but powerful. "This isn't about punishing Mr. Jenkins," she said. "It's about sending a message that racism has no place in our society. We hope this serves as a learning experience for everyone involved." Marcus added, "Our goal is to build bridges, not walls. We still believe in the goodness of this community, and we're committed to making it stronger." Their words echoed far beyond the courthouse steps, reaching every corner of the neighborhood. For many residents, the trial forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and privilege. Conversations that had long been avoided were finally brought to light, sparking both tension and growth. Back at home, Harold sat alone in his living room, staring blankly at the wall. Evelyn joined him after a while, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to admit you were wrong, Harold," she said gently. "Maybe this is your chance to change." Harold remained silent, his pride warring with guilt. Deep down he knew Evelyn was right, but accepting responsibility wouldn't be easy. Still, the seeds of reflection had been planted, and whether he liked it or not, transformation was inevitable. For Angela and Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. While they were relieved to have closure, they understood that winning a legal battle didn't erase the deeper issues at play. True progress would require patience, empathy, and a willingness to listen from everyone. As they stood together on their porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they felt hopeful. Change wasn't easy, but it was possible, and sometimes all it took was one bold step to set the wheels in motion. Little did they know, the ripple effects of this trial would continue to shape their community in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The days following the trial were tense in the neighborhood. The verdict had sent shockwaves through the community, dividing residents into two camps: those who believed justice had been served, and those who felt Harold had been unfairly targeted. Conversations buzzed at grocery stores, coffee shops, and school pickup lines. Some neighbors whispered behind closed doors, while others openly debated the case, their opinions as varied as the colors of their front yard flowers. Harold Jenkins bore the brunt of the fallout. Once seen as a pillar of authority in the neighborhood, albeit a grumpy one, he now found himself ostracized by many. His daily routine, which had once included casual chats with acquaintances or nods of acknowledgement from passers-by, became a lonely affair. People avoided making eye contact with him, and when they did speak, their words carried an edge of disapproval. Even his own wife, Evelyn, grew increasingly frustrated with his refusal to take responsibility for his actions. Evelyn tried to reason with Harold during quiet moments at home, urging him to apologize to the Johnsons and begin repairing the damage he'd caused. "You can't keep pretending you didn't do anything wrong," she said one evening, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "This isn't just about them anymore. It's about us too. Do you want to live like this? With everyone judging you?" Harold clenched his jaw, staring out the window at the darkening sky. "I didn't ask for any of this," he muttered defensively. "They moved in here knowing full well what kind of neighborhood this is. If they wanted acceptance, maybe they should have tried harder." Evelyn sighed deeply, shaking her head. "That's exactly the problem, Harold. You're not giving them a chance. You judge them before even getting to know them, and now look where it's gotten you." Her words stung, but Harold wasn't ready to admit defeat. Pride had always been his armor, shielding him from self-reflection. Yet deep down, cracks were forming. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, he replayed the trial in his mind, the damning evidence, the judge's stern ruling, Angela's composed testimony. Each memory chipped away at his defenses, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth. He had acted out of fear and prejudice, not logic or concern. Meanwhile, Angela and Marcus continued to navigate the aftermath of the trial with grace and determination. While the legal victory was satisfying, they knew it wasn't enough to heal the rift in their community. Change required more than punishment. It demanded understanding. So, they decided to take matters into their own hands. 1. Saturday morning, Angela posted flyers around the neighborhood announcing a community meeting. Titled Building Bridges Together, the event aimed to create a safe space for open dialogue about race, bias, and coexistence. She hoped that by fostering honest conversations, residents could move past their differences and work toward unity. The response was mixed. Some neighbors eagerly RSVP'd, eager to participate in meaningful discussions. Others ignored the flyers altogether, dismissing the idea as unnecessary or overly idealistic. Still, Angela remained optimistic. Progress rarely came easily, but every step forward mattered. On the day of the meeting, the local community center filled with attendees. Chairs formed a large circle, encouraging inclusivity and equal participation. Angela stood near the entrance, greeting each person warmly, As they arrived, Marcus circulated among the crowd, offering refreshments and engaging in light conversation. Despite the tension hanging in the air, there was a sense of cautious curiosity, a shared desire to understand what lay ahead. When everyone had settled in, Angela stepped to the center of the circle and addressed the group. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice steady and inviting. "We know these conversations aren't easy, but they're important if we want to build a stronger, more inclusive community. Our goal isn't to assign blame or point fingers. It's to listen, learn, and grow together." Her opening remarks set the tone for the rest of the meeting. One by one, participants shared their thoughts and experiences. Some spoke about feeling unwelcome in the neighborhood due to their race, religion, or background. Others admitted to harboring biases they hadn't realized until recently. Tears flowed freely as stories unfolded, creating a raw yet powerful atmosphere. Then it was Harold's turn. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he showed up late, slipping quietly into an empty chair near the back. When Angela noticed him, she paused mid-conversation and extended an invitation. "Mr. Jenkins, would you like to say something?" she asked gently. Harold hesitated, visibly uncomfortable under the weight of so many eyes on him. For a moment, it seemed like he might bolt for the door. But then Evelyn nudged him softly, whispering encouragement. Slowly he rose to his feet, his hands trembling as he clasped them together. I don't know where to start," Harold admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I owe everyone an apology, especially you, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. I let my fears get the better of me and I treated you unfairly. I made assumptions about you based on things that had nothing to do with who you are as people." The room fell silent, waiting to see how Angela and Marcus would respond. After a brief pause, Angela nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Jenkins," she replied. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. We accept your apology and hope we can move forward from here." Marcus added, "We're all human and we all make mistakes. What matters is how we choose to grow from them." Harold sat back down, visibly shaken but relieved. It was a small step, but it marked the beginning of healing, not just for him but for the entire neighborhood. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to emerge. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves started reaching out to one another, hosting potlucks and block parties to strengthen bonds. Children played together without regard for skin color or background, their laughter echoing through the streets. Even Harold, though still working to rebuild trust, made an effort to be more approachable. He joined a local gardening club, striking up conversations with people he might have ignored before. For Angela and Marcus, the transformation was proof that resilience and compassion could overcome even the deepest divides. They had entered the neighborhood hoping to find peace and belonging, and despite the challenges they faced, they had succeeded in creating something far greater, a community united by empathy and mutual respect. Still, they knew the journey wasn't over. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight and old habits died hard. But with each passing day, progress became more visible. The neighborhood was no longer defined by its past tensions. Instead, it was shaped by the collective efforts of its residents to embrace diversity and foster connection. As autumn leaves began to fall, painting the sidewalks in hues of orange and gold, Angela and Marcus stood on their porch watching the world around them transform. Their dream of a peaceful suburban life had come true, but not in the way they had imagined. It wasn't perfection they had achieved, it was growth. And in that growth, they found hope, for themselves, for their neighbors, and for the future they were building together. The months that followed the community meeting brought a slow but steady transformation to the neighborhood. What had once been a place divided by fear and misunderstanding began to evolve into something stronger, something built on empathy, patience, and shared humanity. The change wasn't immediate or perfect, but it was undeniable. For Angela and Marcus, witnessing this shift was both rewarding and humbling. They hadn't moved into the neighborhood expecting to spark such profound growth, yet they found themselves at the heart of it. Harold Jenkins, in particular, underwent a remarkable transformation. After his public apology at the community meeting, he made a conscious effort to confront his biases and challenge the beliefs he had held for decades. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, and there were moments when his pride threatened to undo his progress. But Evelyn stood firmly by his side, encouraging him every step of the way. Together, they attended sensitivity training sessions as ordered by the court, though Harold soon realized these lessons extended far beyond legal obligations. They offered him a chance to see the world through new eyes. One Saturday morning, Harold approached Angela and Marcus with an unexpected request. "I've been thinking," he said hesitantly, clutching his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. "Would you mind if I helped out around your yard? Maybe trim some bushes or clean up the driveway? It's the least I can do after everything," Angela smiled warmly, touched by the gesture. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Jenkins," she replied. "We'd appreciate the help." From that day forward, Harold became a regular fixture in the Johnsons' yard. At first, their interactions were awkward, filled with long silences and polite exchanges. But over time, they grew more comfortable with one another. Harold learned about Angela's jewelry business and marveled at her creativity. Marcus shared stories about his work in tech, and Harold listened intently, asking questions that revealed a genuine curiosity. These small moments of connection helped bridge the gap between them, turning what had once been hostility into something resembling friendship. Other neighbors took notice of Harold's efforts and followed suit. Mrs. Thompson, who had always been friendly but reserved, invited Angela and Marcus over for coffee one afternoon. Over steaming cups of tea and homemade cookies, she opened up about her own struggles with prejudice growing up. "I'm ashamed to admit it, but I used to judge people based on their differences," she confessed. "It took me years to unlearn those lessons. Seeing how you two have handled all of this has inspired me to be better, not just for myself but for my grandchildren." Angela nodded thoughtfully. "Change starts with awareness," she said, "and it's never too late to grow." Word of Angela and Marcus's commitment to fostering unity spread beyond their immediate neighborhood. Local news outlets picked up the story, highlighting their efforts to turn conflict into opportunity. Soon, invitations began pouring in from schools, churches, and civic organizations, all eager to hear Angela speak about overcoming prejudice and building inclusive communities. Though initially hesitant to step into the spotlight, Angela embraced the role, knowing her voice could inspire others to take action. At one such event, Angela delivered a speech that resonated deeply with the audience. Standing on stage in a simple yet elegant dress, she recounted her journey from being a target of racism to becoming a catalyst for change. "Prejudice thrives in silence," she said, her voice steady and impassioned. "But love and understanding thrive in conversation. When we choose to listen, to truly hear one another, we create space for healing and growth. That's how we build bridges." Her words earned a standing ovation, and afterward, dozens of people lined up to thank her personally. Among them was a young mother named Lisa, whose eyes glistened with tears. "Your story gives me hope," Lisa said, clutching Angela's hand. "My son is biracial, and I worry about the challenges he'll face as he grows older. Hearing you talk about resilience and compassion reminds me that we can make a difference if we're willing to try." Angela hugged Lisa tightly, feeling a surge of gratitude. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but moments like this reminded her why the fight was worth it. Back in the neighborhood, life continued to improve. Block parties replaced complaints, laughter drowned out arguments, and friendships blossomed where suspicion had once festered. Children of all backgrounds played together without hesitation, their innocence serving as a reminder of what true acceptance looked like. Even Harold, who had once been the epitome of resistance, became one of the Johnsons' biggest supporters. He joined Marcus in organizing a neighborhood cleanup day, rallying volunteers to repaint fences, plant trees, and beautify common spaces. "You know," Marcus remarked during one of their gardening sessions, "if someone had told me 6 months ago that you'd be helping us fix up the yard, I wouldn't have believed it." Harold chuckled, brushing dirt off his gloves. "Neither would I," he admitted. But sometimes life throws you curveballs, and if you're lucky, they end up teaching you something valuable. As winter approached, blanketing the neighborhood, in a soft layer of snow, Angela and Marcus reflected on how far they had come. Their dream of a peaceful suburban life had taken unexpected turns, testing their patience and resolve. Yet, through it all, they had remained steadfast in their belief that kindness could overcome ignorance, and love could conquer hate. One evening, as they sat together on their porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Marcus turned to Angela with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever fully escape prejudice?" he asked quietly. "Or is it something we'll always have to fight against?" Angela leaned her head against his shoulder, considering the question. "I don't know if we'll ever completely eradicate it," she admitted. "But I do believe we can make it smaller, less powerful. Every act of kindness chips away at its foundation. And as long as we keep fighting, keep talking, and keep loving, we'll leave the world a little better than we found it." Marcus smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's all we can ask for, isn't it?" The sound of children laughing drifted over from down the street, mingling with the distant hum of holiday music. Lights twinkled in windows, casting warm glows onto frosted lawns. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of their transformed neighborhood, Angela and Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced adversity head-on, refusing to let hatred define them. Instead, they had chosen to rise above it, using their experiences to inspire others and forge connections that transcended race, age, and background. For Harold, the journey was ongoing. While he still struggled with moments of doubt and discomfort, he no longer shied away from difficult conversations. He sought out opportunities to educate himself about cultures and perspectives different from his own, determined to leave behind a legacy of growth rather than regret. One chilly December morning, as he hung a wreath on his front door alongside Evelyn, he paused to glance at the Johnsons' house next door. Smoke curled gently from their chimney, and the faint scent of pine wafted through the air. "Look at that," Evelyn said, following his gaze. "Doesn't it feel right?" Harold nodded slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah," he murmured. "It does." In the end, the neighborhood wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more compassionate than it had been before. And for Angela, Marcus, Harold, and everyone else who called it home, that was enough. Through courage, humility, and unwavering determination, they had proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged, one conversation, one apology, and one act of kindness at a time.